What up, fools? My name's Tom. I go by Tom Foolery. Today I'm going over some of my positions that I hold and the reasons why. In this video, I'm going to talk about systemic racism. Now, as a conservative, people think, well, it's odd for you to believe in systemic racism. It's odd for you to believe in trans rights. What's with it, dude? Well, most of my other beliefs, pretty much all of my other beliefs outside of those two, are going to fall on the right. But these two, I believe, are more based on facts and morals than they are on my ideology. My Christian morality makes me want to help people. I also believe in individual rights. And when it comes to systemic racism, we can look at this and see that some people's individual rights are being suppressed, which is why I am an advocate for Black Lives Matter. Now, that doesn't mean that I agree with everything that Black Lives Matter does. That's ridiculous. As a Christian, I don't agree with everything that all Christians do. There are some Christians in history who have done some horrific things. I don't have to stand for them, I don't have to protect them, and I don't have to link my name to theirs just because we both fall under the label Christian. There are even entire Christian denominations that I think are deplorable, and I don't accept them, and I don't act as though we have any shared common interests. So, just the same with pretty much any other group or label like BLM. If I consider myself part of BLM, that doesn't mean that I agree with literally everything that they do. But when it comes to systemic racism, this is mostly based on descriptive terms, not prescriptive. So when I say descriptive, I mean we are pointing out facts in the world. We are saying, hey, there's a thing and it exists. Prescriptive means like, I have an idea on how to fix this. So descriptive means, hey, I see there's a problem there. And prescriptive means I know a solution to this problem. Systemic racism doesn't push prescriptive claims. It only pushes descriptive. It lets you know about facts within the world that we can see through studies in sociology. And well, pretty much most statistics as well, especially government statistics, FBI statistics. One of the things that we can look at is something like the rate at which Black people are sentenced to longer terms in prison versus white people for the same crimes and the same priors. All else being equal, Black people still get sentenced to a longer amount of time. When we say this is systemically racist, this does not mean that we think, well, the body of peers who chose to judge this person, we're not saying that they're racist people. There's a difference between doing something racist, taking part in racism, or being a racist. I can say the N-word. Doesn't mean I'm a racist, but I did something racist, and it has a racist outcome, meaning the word that I'm using is only going to be offensive to Black people. The outcome is racist, and systemic racism is only pointing out racist outcomes in systems like businesses, systems like culture, systems like laws even. And you might say, well, there are no laws that are racist anymore. Jim Crow's gone. There are no more laws that are racist. We're talking about laws that have racist outcomes. When we say it's a racist outcome, we mean that it disproportionately affects a specific race in a negative way. So, when Black people are sentenced to longer times in prison for the same crimes as committed by white people, this is systemic racism. There is a system in place that makes it to where they are sentenced longer and do more time and are not able to participate within society much more often or disproportionately compared to white people. And the racist outcomes can have a dramatic effect on their culture. One thing that lots of people like to say when I have debates with them about systemic racism is, don't you think most of this comes from black people having a toxic culture? Say, yeah, for sure. But we have to ask ourselves, why do they have a toxic culture? And if we come up with answers, we want to ask ourselves, well, why are those things in place? So if I look at systemic racism, one of the things that I think are very likely to lead to a toxic culture within the black community is the fact that they have less father figures or less two-parent households, regardless of whether or not it's the mother or the father. I just want them to have two parents in the household. And things like welfare can make it more likely to where they will have a single parent in the household. Now, this isn't on purpose. This makes sense for the most part. If you get put on welfare, they say we'll give you a certain amount of money. You have a couple more kids, we'll give you a little bit more money. Now, you bring in a second income into the house, they say, let's cut that in half, right? They're going to cut the amount of money that you're going to make, which for a black mother, this would incentivize me to say, hey, you can stay in your own house. I will stay in my house with my children, and we can still date and be together or even be married, but you can't live with me because that's going to cut my checks. You can have all the opinions you want about welfare, but this is a system that affects whether or not these kids will have a father in the household. Kids who grow up in single parent households are way more likely to commit crimes, do drugs, drop out of school. They're less likely to keep a stable job. They're less likely to go to college. All of the things that we would think of that would make somebody more likely to be successful within the United States, all of these things align with whether or not you grew up in a single parent household. Now, we can look and see that actually when welfare was instituted and these rules came about, this is when the black families immediately dropped off a cliff in the amount of two-parent households that they had. And black families are much less likely to have two parents in the household than white families are. This could lead to them having a toxic culture if they have a bunch of kids who are growing up who are more likely to be arrested or more likely to commit crimes, do drugs, all of these things. Yes, this is going to lead to you having a toxic culture. Not only that, but just having less education in general means you're less likely to make more money. And the more money that's in your neighborhood, the more likely you are to have a very nice culture where your dinner forks and your salad forks are separated. Or, I don't know, whatever makes a good culture, whatever are signifiers for a great culture to you. Whether or not you have money in your community is a big thing. And when it comes to things like redlining, we pushed people into certain areas in real estate by drawing a red line. Lots of different businesses, lots of different corporations, they drew these red lines around undesirable areas. Now you might ask, isn't this just a good business decision to not want to invest money in undesirable areas? And the answer is yes, but at the same time, we are also affecting a specific culture who are all going to live together. We are tribalistic people. So when real estate draws a line around a certain area and they say, this is an undesirable area, we don't want to move white people in here. Well, who all moves in there? Black people then, because they are also considered undesirables. Once they move them in there, well, now all of the banks also have red lines around these areas. And when people come in and they say, hey, I want to invest money, I want to build a business, these areas are undesirable. They don't want them to build a business there. They don't want to invest money there because it's more likely to get vandalized, or it's more likely to have poor management. They're not going to be able to hire good people because this is an undesirable area. Again, is this good business? Yes, of course it is. But at the same time, you are making it to where black people who live in this community are very unlikely to be able to get good jobs, get well-paying jobs, and be able to change their culture in the way that we would want them to. And so now, over the course of, 70, 80 years, their culture has gotten more and more toxic due to a lot of these issues. Going to jail, not having father figures, not being able to put money in their community. These things would make any culture go down the drain and start turning to things like crime to make more money. This isn't just a black thing. There were Italians and Irishmen who were pushed into these areas a while ago when we didn't consider them white. These were called the ghettos, and they started mobs and mafias and gangs and things like that. They turned to crime as well when they weren't able to make money legitimately like everybody else. This isn't something that only applies to black people. So when we look at all of the ways America, not white people, but the United States of America, not just the government, the entire United States, the culture, the government, the businesses, the systems that we have in place have made it to where black people are not really able to have a better culture. And when I say that, does that mean that the individuals are not able to make choices for themselves? No, of course not. But we want to look at how likely it is for somebody to be able to do something. If I give you a penny, there's not a high likelihood that you're going to be able to invest that in a couple of days and make $1 million off of it. The likelihood is very little. If I want you to invest the money and make a lot of money, I would have to give you a lot more and direct you in the right areas so that you can invest it in the right ways and be able to make a lot of money. We want to look at the likelihood because we are shaped by our environment. This is, of course, an objective fact. We are influenced in many ways by the area that we live and the people that we live around. Like with schools. Funding for schools is very important. The more funding you have for a school, the more likely you are to get better teachers, better equipment, better school books, all sorts of things. But funding is based on the area that you live in and how wealthy that area is. Schools, at least on average, 40% of your funding comes from property taxes. And so if you live in a poorer area, your school is going to get less funding, which means you will have less educated kids, which will go to poorer colleges or, not as great of colleges and are even more likely to drop out at that point. And then we also have things like how easy it is for a black person to get a job. There are all sorts of studies that show that people who have black sounding names are much less likely to get a job or even a callback on their application than if they had white sounding names. We can look at numerous different things like Working Knowledge, the business research for business leaders. Minorities who whiten job resumes get more interviews. Or we can look at the NBER research that talks about employers' replies to racial names. It says right here, job applicants with white names needed to send about 10 resumes to get one callback. Those with African American names needed to send around 15 resumes to get one callback. And then this is the most famous of all of the studies, named Are Emily and Greg more employable than Lakeisha and Jamal? A field experiment on labor market discrimination. In these studies, what they did is they sent out a bunch of applications with white sounding names, and then a bunch of applications with black sounding names. The catch is that all of the applications are exactly the same. And then they saw how many of the applications got a call for an interview. Not the job, but at least a callback. The point isn't that we are racist towards these people, but it's that their culture and the way that they've been interacting within society has been influenced by the way that they've been treated. But now we've influenced them into these areas, and then we punish them for it. We're not explicitly racist. We don't hate black people, and we're not trying to make them fail. But there are systems in place that have made it to where they are more likely to fail. And if they are more likely to fail than white people are, then we are expecting a lot more from black people than we are from white people. We expect them to try a lot harder. We expect them to put in a lot more applications. We expect them to do better with less education. We expect them not to go to jail, not to drop out of school, to get a good job when they are less likely to have two-parent households. We expect a lot more from them to be successful within the United States than we are expecting from white people, because white people have or are more likely to have systems that will make them more likely to be successful. Now, this isn't me saying, now here's the answer. You can come up with the answer on your own. And I think that right-wingers, if we could start to get on board with the idea of systemic racism, we'd probably have a lot better options or better ideas for this, better prescriptions than the left does. But first, we have to acknowledge facts. First, we have to look at the studies, we have to look at the data, and we have to acknowledge facts as facts. You could look at the facts as facts and say, you know what, I don't think we should do anything about this. And that's perfectly fine. But what's important to me is that right-wingers actually acknowledge that this is a thing in the first place. How to fix it can be debated. But that's all I got on this one. I appreciate you, and I'll see you next time. Later, fools.